Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Today's topic is community wind energy. My guests are Patrick Doyle. He's Vice President and Chief of Development at Ridgeline Energy. It's a major development company based in Seattle, but they also have an office in Guilderland, the eastern part of the country. And my other guest is Carol Murphy. She's Executive Director of ACE New York, Alliance for Clean Energy. I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Let's get into this topic. Alternative energy is big, green is big, but it's not as big as we want it to be, right?
That's for sure. Green energy brings jobs and development as well as clean air.
Clean air and energy independence. I think certainly ACE New York's role is to promote as much renewable energy and energy efficiency as we can.
And you're an alliance? What does that mean?
What we are, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and the interesting thing about our organization is that it's not only people doing these renewable energy technologies like wind, solar, hydro, fuel cells. We also have as part of our makeup and our board of directors environmental and public interest groups, so Union of Concerned Scientists, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, NRDC, Renewable Energy Long Island. People who are concerned about the environment and climate change are also part of our organization.
So it's a very broad based group.
Yes, it is.
Nice. And Ridgeline?
Yes, Freeline is a developer based in Seattle, as you mentioned, and I was founded in 2002 and concentrated in the beginning on wind projects in the Northwest, and has built about 200 turbines in the Northwest, but more recently has expanded into solar. So California, the Southwest is a big area for solar, and then also in the along the East Coast.
And on the East Coast, is it mostly wind?
It has been historic wind, but we're definitely looking actively at solar. And in fact, the governor in the state talked about the state doing more in solar. So I think we're in the right place at the right time here.
Now, part of your name is, and your title, it has to do with development.
That's right, yes.
And what's the significance of that? I mean, it's kind of obvious that it means building it up, but the fact that you've actually got that in your title.
Yes,
must be a crucial part of what's going on. I mean, how do you get this to go? We know how to do it. Is that what it's saying?
Yes. So, especially in a new business like wind or solar, you need to, or you're faced with a situation where there isn't any, and then you need to develop not just projects, but with ACE New York and Carol and her colleagues, to develop the industry, to lay the foundation for this industry, for it to grow. So specifically, we are charged with finding sites with a good resource, and then developing them into a facility that can actually produce clean, renewable energy.
Great.
So, and the development process could take, of a wind project or a solar project, could take 3 years to 10 years.
So that seems like that's probably takes longer to get to that point than it does to actually install or build it.
Actually, that's certainly with wind. That's the case. The wind turbines actually, and the solar panels, literally come in boxes.
Okay.
So you could put a wind turbine up in a couple of days.
It's the permitting and the siting and the approval process that takes a long time.
Great.
So for example, I brought a couple of pieces of equipment here. So the first thing for a wind project that you need to do is measure the wind.
So you need wind.
We need wind, and we need to know we have wind. So we put up a measuring mast or mass and put an instrument like this on the mast and try to put it as high as we can.
We're used to seeing things like that at the airport.
At the airport, right. Yeah, and in fact, we refer to the wind measurements at airports for our long-term correlation. So when we put up a temporary mast, it's for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Longer than I would have thought you needed to test, though.
Well, some of them are up for 10 years. If it takes 10 years to develop a project, then you might have a mast. We have a project that we hope to build which has 10 years of data. But typically in the beginning, you want to put this up for 1 or 2 years, measure the wind, the speed, and see if there's enough wind. So that's really the very first step, and you measure the speed and the direction.
Oh, okay. I was wondering what that was. It did look like a rudder, so it is kind of a rudder.
Yes, yeah. And so it will measure the direction of the wind and the speed of the wind. So you actually end up with hundreds of thousands of data points. And you generally have 2 of these at the highest point, and then 2 10 meters lower, and then 2 10 meters lower. So you have, if one fails, then you still have, you haven't lost your data.
Well, that would be bad when you're talking about years of work to have.
Right.
Oh, it's stuck.
Right. And these come from Vermont. These are made in Vermont. We also use SODAR, which is use sound rays. Oh. And so you project the rays into the air, and
how they bounce off the
will tell you how fast the wind speed is. And so the advantage of using the SODAR is you don't have to put up a physical tower. You can measure the wind speed much higher than if you had a physical tower.
Right. So you have a lot of sample points up and down vertically.
That's right. And ideally, you will take the physical measurements and the sound measurements and correlate them to each other. And then, as you mentioned, as you spoke about the airport, then you will correlate your 1 or 2 or 4 years of data on the site to what you got at the nearest airport. So that's the beginning of the process.
And we'll go through that whole process in a little bit. Let's look at New York in general for a moment. How are we doing in New York?
Well, actually, in terms of wind resources, we're the 15th windiest state. And you might not think that, but we have really good on-land wind resources as well as offshore in the Great Lakes and off the coast of Long Island in New York City. In terms of actual megawatts we have installed, we're just out of the top 10. We're number 11. We have 1,500 megawatts. To put that in perspective, though, 1 megawatt basically powers about 900 to 1,000 homes. New York as a whole, on our peak day in the summer, is about 34,000 megawatts.
Now, maybe even to take it to the micro level, one home, what would you say, 10 to 20 kilowatts?
Well, this is a model of a 3 megawatt turbine, which is 3 megawatt is 3,000 kilowatts.
Okay, right.
If this, if the wind blew at its highest level all the time, this would power 3,000 homes.
So that would be about 10. Maybe 10 kilowatts.
Right. Yeah, I think that's about right.
It depends on what all you have plugged in your appliances and energy use. But we do have a very good wind resource, and New York State has a policy of wanting to get 30% of our energy from renewable resources by 2015. And that may sound like a lot, but we actually started out with a lot of hydro, so we started out pretty much at 18%.
Oh, so that only leaves 12. That's not too bad.
We have, I think, made good progress, but there's still quite a bit of wind that's out there that can be developed. I mentioned we have about 1,500 megawatts online. There's about 5,000, more than 5,000 still that are have been identified as good sites that are potentially available to create additional wind farms and more generation.
As I was prepping, I came across something that surprised me, that there was enough wind, if we captured it, to do 50% of our energy just with wind.
Department of Energy did a study that said, looking nationally, can we meet 20% of our energy needs? And they said absolutely, without a question.
Safe.
Yes.
Yeah, without major changes to
infrastructure
to transmission and so on. Yeah,
Right.
I mean it would require some changes, but without major changes.
Okay.
So I think 20%. That's a good goal.
So our goal, you said, was 30%.
30%
Total.
and wind would definitely play the largest part in that. Wind, and I think solar is starting to come on, fuel cells, biomass. Hydro, we have a lot of existing hydro. There hasn't been that much development of new hydro. Wind and solar have kind of been the ones that have been leading the way. Fuel cells are also important. Some biomass plants that you may have heard about. New York's been doing some research on that. So I think the potential is there. New York has a good program, and along with developers like Ridgeline and ACE New York and the environmental groups, what we've been trying to do is to get the policies and the incentives right so we actually get the green dollars, economic development, the additions to the tax base, emissions-free renewable energy. And what other states have done, and we'd love to have happen in New York, is to get some of that supply chain manufacturing here. Other states have been able to take little-use manufacturing plants, and if you make gears, you can make gears for wind turbine gearboxes. Right. If you have steel, you can make towers. So we hope to be able to capture some of that economic development as well.
Now, I was curious. Colonie is our market here. Of course, people here can invest in wind energy wherever you think we can build it, but how do we rank? Do we have any places around here that could actually potentially be sites?
Well, as Carol lives in Colonie, I'll let you have the first shot.
I don't know that we can as sites. Patrick knows better than I do where the wind resources are. They're primarily in the Helderbergs there in Bern,
but that's certainly close enough to
but
invest
we
in.
do have some economic development right here in Colonie. AWS True Power, who's grown exponentially from kind of a small firm to now, I think they have a couple hundred people who work internationally. They have international offices.
India, I think they have an office
in India, Spain, MSC,
Texas,
Electrical
they have an office in
Systems. They're also right in this Colonie area, and those are the kind of people who go out and do the site preparation work, who go out and measure, take all those data points and figure out what's the best spot for a wind farm, where would the turbines be placed. They're also getting back into solar too. So, we do have some businesses right in the Colonie area that are very much involved with wind and renewable energy development.
Right. You probably recall the article in the Times Union, maybe it was 9 months ago, which said that per capita, the capital district has more people working in green energy than anywhere else in the nation.
If I did, I forgot it. I'm very good at forgetting things.
In any case, there are a lot of people working in
that's impressive
in the environmental field here, and Colonie has these two really these two companies, CG Power Systems and AWS True Power. They're leaders in the nation in wind resource work, and also in electrical engineering field.
And I don't know if I mentioned there's a company called Ridgeline based in Guilderland here.
Yes, we aren't quite as big as they are, but we're trying our best. Yeah.
And there are some projects that you have in New York, I know from my research. You want to go over those a little bit?
Yes, so we spoke about how New York can meet this goal of 30%, which is still, it's quite an aggressive goal, especially as we've got 4 years left. And what happened with the first projects is there were large projects which were sited near to a large power line that had existing capacity. So, of course, the first thing that happens is the large windy sites close to existing transmission.
You want to build those out,
right? And so, a few years ago, we looked at what's the next step, and we looked at offshore, as Carol has mentioned already, and there is a very strong wind resource off the coast of New York City. And it's very exciting and very interesting. And it's fascinating, and Carol can probably speak more to that. But onshore, we started to look at smaller projects that don't need large transmission lines, and don't need large features. So, we looked at what we call community scale projects with, say, 6 to 12, turbines like this on a ridge, let's say 3 miles long, that would connect to a medium to a medium voltage line, and those lines.
Would that need to be built, this line, or would you be able to look into it?
They're existing.
Okay.
Yeah. So we definitely want to use the existing infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
And those lines tend to feed the towns and villages in the area. So, instead of the power going up on a high voltage line and going 200 miles, it basically goes onto the medium voltage line that serves the local communities. And so that power is, from a community scale project, is going to be consumed locally, within, let's say, a 25-mile radius.
That seems to have a lot of positive aspects to it.
Yes, I mean, it's something that in upstate New York, people have been very conscious of large new power lines being built in upstate New York to bring power downstate.
The look, or maybe.
Well, people don't like new transmission lines. Actually, they don't like.
They don't like anything that sticks up from the ground.
Well,
sometimes
people actually don't like. Or at least many people are concerned about new developments. It's just in our nature.
Right. Not in my backyard, sort of thing.
Yes, and we're conservative. So especially with, with power lines, there tends to be some resistance, even though we need it.
Right.
So in any case, our model is to develop these community scale projects close to existing lines. Because we're a wind developer, not a developer of transmission lines, for example.
Right.
We leave that to somebody with.
So I guess then, what role for the community project would that have in the bigger picture? How significant is that?
Right. So that's an interesting question, and I would like to refer to, first of all, a couple of other models for community energy.
Right.
Actually, I'm going to mention 3 other models. You spoke about the Helderbergs, and there's a group in the Helderbergs called Helderberg Community Wind, who have been measuring the wind and doing some studies on with the goal of potentially putting in 3 wind turbines up there. And that's a neighborhood group, and they meet every second Sunday, and they're very interested. In fact, they're a member.
They are.
Of Carol's organization. Very active and very keen, and I would say true believers. We've been approached also by towns that would like to have their own wind turbine or turbines. And then our model is community scale. So we have 6 to 10 wind turbines, but we do all the financing ourselves.
Uh-huh. So that's an advantage. You don't have such a huge amount of money per project, which then gets tied up for.
Right. I mean, ultimately, even these moderate-sized projects require $40 to $50 million. So that's and that's to build, and then to develop. You're talking about to develop a wind project, $1 million or more dollars, and this is an incredible amount of money for anybody.
And you haven't You haven't gotten any energy
yet.
Right.
You're putting all of the cash out there without yet having any steel in the ground. It does take a lot of time to permit, to go through the approvals. All of those things contribute to that anywhere from 3 to 10 year development period he was talking about. So
you take 3 to 4 years to develop a project, 1 year to build it, and only then do you start to recover not just your development costs, but also your construction costs.
Any idea about the life of a?
We look at 20 to 25 years, and you're generally into, after construction, it's after the 10th year when you start to recover your investment.
Okay, well that's not bad.
You
most. You got 15 years to.
Yeah, you got Then you got 15 years to pay the interest.
Well, I think one of the advantages of renewable energy, and this is certainly something I think that is important for people to know, is that once you do build it, every time the wind blows, that's a free fuel delivery.
So you really have
When
a
the
different
sun
attitude.
shines, yeah, it's solar. When it rains, it's a fuel delivery for hydro. So it's really getting those capital costs paid off as quickly as you can, and having the incentives there, because obviously there's no free lunch when it comes to energy. There just isn't. But once you make that investment, it pays dividends for years to come. The other thing that I think is important for communities to realize is that there are payments in lieu of taxes. There are major, major contributions to the tax base, as well as every developer that I know. They're out there, they're hiring locals to do the construction, they're buying their gravel locally, they're employing the local people there when they're actually building the wind farm, as well as there's payments to, obviously, the people holding the land, the leases, and I'm sure Patrick can talk more about this a little bit too.
And you mentioned the energy dependence, which of course is on everybody's
energy
mind.
independence is very important. We're not held hostage to world events, having oil embargoes, natural disasters like we've seen with hurricanes and BP oil spill and all of that.
And I remember in, I think it was '87, we had a big ice storm, and I'll never forget the picture in my mind of this electric tower in Canada that, because of the ice, had just crumbled as if you had taken a piece of very weak material and pushed it down into the ground. And we were all out with power for 3 weeks, and that's what, several hundred miles away.
Right, and last year, for example, there was a large outage in Texas. I think it was a problem with the gas. I can't remember the exact problem, but the wind turbines kept going. So, so you're bringing the economic benefit to your own state and your own community. So, for example, this program that Carol mentioned, this renewable portfolio standard, people who bid into that are strongly encouraged to use New York content. And so during the development phase, this $1 million, I would say 80% of that is high value work that's done by New York firms, such as AWS, such as
And all that money
CP Power
then
Systems.
recirculates.
And then it recirculates. And actually, a lot of that money is spent in Colonie. And then, of course, when you build a project, much of the material and the labor does come from New York, like the gravel and concrete and that kind of stuff. So it's a very significant source of wealth. A community scale project of about 20 megawatts will cost in direct funds about 40 to 50 million. But once you look at the way that money flows through the economy, you're probably talking about $100 million worth of
benefits.
Of benefits. So, and that's one of the great pleasures out of this a business, is that you take a resource which is not being used, and then you create that kind of wealth. So it's very rewarding in that sense, and a lot of people get work out of it.
Yeah, one of the other things I think that's important too, since most of the wind farms and where the good wind resources are also tend to be where it's fairly rural. And in many cases, having wind turbines on their property enables people to keep the family farms, because it's been very tough for the farming community in New York, whether you're a dairy farmer or a crop farmer, to keep the family farm. So rather than selling off land for another subdivision or some other purpose, it allows them, they can farm right up to the turbine.
So they own the property. Maybe it's mortgaged up to the hilt, but they own the property, and now they have, without doing anything other than the investment, they've got a money-making source right on their property.
Right. The landowners have to agree to hosting the wind turbine, and in exchange they get royalty payments for the life of the project. So if we take a community scale project in central New York, every year the landowners are going to earn about $150,000 a year. Every year.
And that's for the 4 to 8 or 4 to 6.
Right. Yeah. Every year, the town, the county, and the school is going to earn about $150,000 a year in payments, and then about the same amount will be paid in wages. So, almost $500,000 a year that those entities wouldn't otherwise get is paid into, modest-sized community in upstate New York. So it's a tremendous gain for its communities that don't have there aren't that many other businesses coming into upstate New York. So it's a huge gain.
You look at it, and I think on the one hand, it's a no-brainer. Energy independence, a lot of money recirculated in the local economy. So what are the inertia, or maybe even the active kinetic energy that you have to overcome in order to get these projects going?
A lot of it is status quo, invested interests, people who own dirty generation are not happy to see clean renewable energy coming in, because actually for every 1,000 megawatts of wind on our electric system, it saves all of us $300 million a year. So it suppresses the prices, and we're displacing dirtier fossil fuel plants. Well, the people that own that don't really like it. I think the other thing too, and we kind of started off with this before we went on camera, I think a lot of the concern is just this is a different technology than we're used to seeing.
So is there a certain aspect of it where people aren't sure it'll work?
They're not sure that it'll work. They don't really know what a wind farm looks like. So they tend to believe some of the wild, things that they may find on the internet, which some people think, oh, I saw it on the internet, it must be true. Well, no. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And the other thing I think, and to Patrick's point before, wind turbines, we think the old windmills that were spinning, back in the days when this was really, truly a rural America with a lot of farms, and that's what they used to bring their water up. So we've had this for a long time, but people think this is some new technology and it's somehow scary. And
it's really just being efficient and creative and using what you have instead of paying somebody else to pull oil out of the ground
and
in the Mideast.
We're cleaning the air as we're doing it. We're not contributing to global warming and climate change and all the things that people are starting to be concerned about. We should have been concerned about it for the last, 100 years, but...
if you take a trip to China, you can convince people, but that's an expensive trip, but their air is terrible.
Right. No, and I mean, we read in the paper this morning about Iran potentially bombing the Straits,
right.
And then our oil prices and gas prices are predicted to go up by 50%. So if we can, instead of taking that oil from the Middle East and putting it into our cars, if we can take wind-generated power and at nighttime fuel our cars with electricity, it's our home-produced clean energy. And the wind, you don't need to drill. You don't need to frack.
Right.
You don't need to put the fuel in a pipeline. You don't need to store it. And then you don't have exhaust air, hot exhaust air, polluting us.
I think these things actually look fairly attractive. If you drive down Central Avenue and you look at the telephone poles that are leaning and wires that are hanging, we brought some Europeans over here and they thought, wow, what an infrastructure you people have.
Right.
With all the wires, but they have these all over the place.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think they're beautiful. I think they are. I think they're like moving sculptures, but some people don't want to look at them. I think the interesting thing is, and Patrick certainly has been part of this, when children go to visit wind farms, when they have that as part of their education, they think, well, why wouldn't we use the wind? Why wouldn't we use the sun? How stupid are my parents?
Right.
Why wouldn't we?
How did they grind their wheat? They had water, and they would have a wheel, and we take pictures, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Right, and many of our forefathers came here using the same technology, either on sailing ships or this is the same. These blades are like the wings of a plane. It works on the same concept of lift. So this is a technology that is in widespread use, and this resource has been used for thousands of years. But as Carol said, there are there are people who already supply electricity that comes from, for example, coal. The amount of electricity that's been generated from coal in the US has dropped from 50% to, I think, 44% in the last few years. That's billions of dollars of less revenue for the coal industry. And so there are interests that don't want to see this new competitor come in, and you've got stuff on the web which says, we can't have wind because it has to be backed up. Well, for example, this state already has 1,200 megawatts of spinning reserve available all the time in case a coal plant fails or a transmission line fails.
And this can keep it spinning, or it can keep it...
Right, so...
You want to explain what that is? I'm not sure everybody knows what the spinning energy is.
I spent 5 years at the New York Independent System Operator. They run the wholesale power grid. They keep the lights on, keep the competitive markets fair and reliable. And as Patrick was saying, that 34,000 megawatts that I talked about that you may get to on a peak day, you have to have additional reserve of some 18% beyond that, just because transmission lines do go down, power plants do shut off. There are, they shut down for maintenance, they shut down for other reasons. So you always have to have, redundancy built into the system. And at any one time, there is this additional energy that can be called up at a moment's notice, the spinning reserve. So having renewables on the system is no different than having all these other, mechanical generators that have failures and go on and off for maintenance. So at any one time, the New York ISO is balancing the system up and down, ramping things up and down to make sure that we have a steady supply of electricity.
So that measurement, you go back to that, that's really important to know that there's enough here that you'll be able to capture enough to make the investment worthwhile. And it doesn't really matter that it works 24 hours a day. We just need to know that there's enough.
Right. And we don't use our cars 24 hours a day, but we still have cars.
Right.
We don't use a toaster 24 hours a day, but we still find it, at least it's useful to me to have
I use one every morning.
The other thing is that the ISO does is just as they have the other generators kind of telling them what they're going to do the next day, they have a forecasting system for wind, and people can bid in the day before. And so, it is very much integrated into our power grid now, and we can actually have up to 8,000 megawatts more without affecting the reliability of the system at all. So there's plenty of room for expansion.
What can people do to help?
Well, one way that you or I can increase the amount of energy that we get from renewables is to buy green energy from from National Grid. It costs. It's a voluntary program, so it costs a little bit more. But when you say I want to buy wind or hydro, then National Grid, will go and procure that from, from a hydro generator or from a wind or from a solar. So that's a good, good way to do it. At a higher level, tell your elected representatives that you want to have more home-produced, clean, renewable, non-polluting energy.
I was just going to say that there's a lot of information on our website, which is the www.aceny.org.
And we'll put that up.
And then WEA, American Wind Energy Association, AWEA.org. But the biggest thing out there right now that I think is extremely important that Patrick mentioned, Congress needs to act to extend some of the incentives that are going away at the end of this year, particularly for wind, or we won't be sitting here talking about renewable energy.
So a lot of the state money is coming from the federal government?
Not so much. The state programs are there on their own, but they're federal tax incentives.
Which are very important.
They are, and what they do is, instead of, the way the government does this, instead of paying your tax to the government, you can put that money into a solar or wind project.
How do you do that?
Well, it's
you invest in it, and then that's
right.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it can be done at the retail level. We could put solar panels on our roofs, and obtain federal and I think state grants,
Yes, there are
state
state
support.
grants.
Yeah, so we can do it at the retail level, but otherwise, large companies that have a lot of taxable income, again, instead of paying the money to the government, they can invest in a clean renewable facility. And so some of the companies that do that are Google, Berkshire Hathaway, JP Morgan, I think Goldman Sachs, many of the insurance companies like, I think MetLife and Prudential and those kind of companies would certainly look at this and say, hey, I can invest in the future. Not that investing and paying your taxes is an investment in the future, but
but the point is, we want to be able to make ourselves independent. We want to be able to have a good environment, both. Right. And by producing locally, we do the same thing the revolutionary people did. They said, look, if we have to buy everything from England, it wasn't oil, but it was other things,
right,
then how are we going to fight them?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty important, and the U.S. is making tremendous progress. About 30% of the new electrical generating capacity in the U.S. in the last 5 years or so has come from wind. About 30%.
Wow.
So
that is good progress.
And as I mentioned, the amount of electricity we're getting from coal has dropped. So
only 6%, though.
That is a lot of. I mean, this was built up over
energy,
60 to 70 years. So I mean, this is an industry that. It's a huge, slow-moving. So it's not going to happen that quickly. We just have to do it every year. The other thing, Carol spoke about the production tax credit. So what happens when these companies take their tax credits and invest it in renewable? When they invest it in wind, the U.S. now has 75,000 people directly employed in wind, and I think in solar is maybe about half that, Carol, is it? But
yeah, though solar is starting to catch up as solar panel prices are dropping.
So you're talking about 100,000 people that benefit from from this policy. So I think it's obviously important that the government continues to support non-polluting renewable resources, so that we get more and more of our energy from renewable resources and become less dependent on imports and less dependent on burning fossil fuel.
Because we have very short memories after the first Arab oil embargo and President Carter and
73,
Congress said,
74.
we need to do more to create domestic energy supply. So we got into cogeneration, investment in hydropower, landfill gas, and then gas and oil prices went down. And
$6. I mean, that's
Reagan
unbelievable
came in
today.
and ripped the solar panels off the White House. And here we are, talking once again about needing to do more with domestic resources and resources that are clean and efficient. So hopefully we'll learn our lesson this time. And what happened is the Europeans, they went ahead and took the technology that was developed in the U.S. and now they're selling it back to us in many cases.
Right. Yeah. So we need to do it ourselves.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you both for being on the show. I hope the message gets heard, and
we hope so too.
Yeah.
And we live long and prosper, and I think this would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show, that you tune in again next time, and that you have a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.